Okay.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to ask a few questions of Alan Cumming, and I'm going to start with one about how you became involved in this project, because if I understand correctly, the script was written about 30 years ago. And
When I wasn't born.
and loosely based, I gather, on the true story of a flamboyant gay man who was trying to adopt a mentally handicapped child. How did this project come to you, and what drew you to it?
Well, what happened was after many, many years, Travis, the director and writer, found or was given the script. I mean, he can tell you about that, but then he rewrote it. And this was just a couple of years ago, so I became involved in it. We shot it not last summer, but the summer before. And I became involved, earlier that year, when it was kind of in its early state. He'd done, it was a few drafts after I joined it, before we shot it. And I responded to it on many levels. It's an amazing story. It's a great part. It's, as someone who feels strongly about gay rights or just human rights, I found it very exciting that there would be something that would be such a good piece of entertainment, would also say so much and have so much that people would be hopefully provoked and changed by. And I think that was really the biggest thing, the kind of sense of injustice in it was something I think perhaps because I'm Scottish, we have a genetic component where anything about injustice or people doing something bad to people less fortunate than ourselves, I want to be a part of it.
Yeah. Was it also partly so that you could sing, you're a performer, that you could sing in your own voice songs like Bob Dylan, I Shall Be Released, or Come to Me? Was that appealing?
Yes. I mean, I wanted to be able to, I don't sing them in my own voice, but it was an interesting thing because in the film, I sing songs in a very different way to how I had sung them in films or musicals before, because they're not, he is a performer, and so that's why he's singing the songs, but they're also very cleverly placed lyrically within the story of the film. And indeed, the film ends, the last kind of part of the story is not even verbalized, it's sung. And I found that really amazing. And that was also quite difficult because you had to record the songs way before you shot those scenes. So we had to have big discussions about the feeling of the performance of the songs. But that was another added excitement thing, but also daunting, And also, though, when you do these films, you never really know until the very last minute which songs are going to be the ones, because it's all about publishing and permission and money. And so we didn't actually, it changed all the time which songs. But then, when we got, for example, the Bob Dylan song at the end, I Shall Be Released, that was pretty amazing.
Yeah, and the lyrics seem so appropriate to the story,
yeah.
In addition to being one of the classic songs from that time. Could you tell us a little bit about working with Isaac, is it Leva? Who plays Marcos?
Isaac is just, he's amazing, isn't he? I can't tell you, I just love him so much. And I think the best part of doing this film, when I walk away from, once it's released and whatever happens to it, I feel I'll walk away in 10 years' time, I'll look back on it, and meeting Isaac will be the most beautiful thing about the whole experience for me, because he is just this light, and he's just a joy to be around, and he was incredibly present and responsible and kind of professional as an actor and to work with, let alone it's his spirit is just so beautiful, and this has been an amazing experience for him and an amazing journey for him as a person, and it's just he said his dreams have come true in making this film.
It was his first film?
Yeah.
And had he done any acting before that?
Well, Travis found him at this. Well, not found him, but he goes to this. He's 22 now, so he's 20 when we made the movie, and he had started just about 6 months, I think, before the movie made, or a few months before we shot, he'd started going to this school that is a sort of a arts and theatre and dance school for people with mental and physical difficulties. And so it's, whenever there's a character like that needed in a movie, this is in LA, then that's one of the places that they go to. So they found Isaac there, and this was the first part he'd ever got. I know, and so he's just lovely. I love him.
Well, he has a wonderful quality on screen, and when he gets donuts, I think we're all a little bit relieved, and yeah. And I'm curious because Travis Fine, and you're going to hear a little bit more about him in a moment, and we may have a little surprise for you, as a matter of fact. But for the moment, I'm going to ask about working with someone who hasn't made that many motion pictures, but who clearly got really deep performances from you, from Isaac Leva, from Garrett Dillahunt, who plays Paul. Could you talk a little about how you worked? Whether, for example, especially with Isaac, was there much improvisation? Did you stay close to the screenplay? Did you tend to do many takes?
We didn't do too many takes because this film was shot in record time. It was we didn't have much room to muck about. So, I always think as well as an actor or as a director that, if you get a couple of takes that you feel really good about, why bother do more? Do you know what I mean? It's that awful thing, you go, perfect, one more. You think, why? and unless there's a real reason, so that wasn't really an issue. We didn't really improvised a wee bit. Some things we improvised, but we stuck pretty strongly to the script. It was such a well-written thing. You don't muck about when you've got. And as I say, the biggest thing was just we had so much to do every day, and also just such a grueling, heart-wrecking things to do, racking things rather. That it was you just had to just get on with it. And Garrett is amazing and really just always there and completely, in a way, one of the things I didn't mention about Isaac was that he kind of reminded me of what acting should be about. It should be completely present and honest and like a child, and just everything should just be right there on the surface. He's happy, he's jumping up and down, he's sad, he's just wailing. I loved that. And you sort of, when you look at it on paper, it's like a very, very emotional and difficult story with two people in the lead roles who've never met. I met Garrett at the wig fitting with hardly any rehearsals, made for 25 cents, and in 4 weeks we had to shoot it in. And yeah, it didn't seem like that at all. It seemed we had just, Isaac was, I've said this before, Isaac's more professional than most of the actors I work with on a regular basis. So he was, we would be on our phones, Garrett and I, and chatting. He'd be like, "Come on, we're going for a take."
I'm guessing this is a little different, for example, from the film. We showed a clip from Eyes Wide Shut. Oh. And I must say, your part is really small in the film, but the resonance of it after I saw it was way beyond that. Working with Stanley Kubrick must have been very different from what you just described, made over a long period of time for a much larger budget. I was just curious, I know it came right after Cabaret, but how you got that part and working with Kubrick?
I actually did that before I did Cabaret.
It was before?
Yeah. Before I did Cabaret on Broadway, it was the year before.
That's right. I'm sorry. Eyes Wide Shut took 2 years to film. So though it came out in 1999, it would have been shot in 97, and you did the revival in 98. Sorry.
Yeah, I know what it is. Well, the thing was, Stanley did more than 2 takes, and, but it wasn't, it was sort of, it was never, there's a sort of an image of him, a sort of an urban myth or a kind of a cliche about him that he was really grumpy and angry and it was and he was very dictatorial, and B, that he just did millions and millions of takes and would never talk to you, and I didn't find that at all. I thought, I had a great time. I loved him. I thought he was hilarious. We laughed like drains, And yes, we did do. Oh, my phone's buzzing. I hope you can't hear that. It's Stanley from the other side. Although we did do lots and lots of takes, every single one of them, I knew why we were doing it each time. You know, he made it very clear. He was very incredibly concise, and you'd watch it back on the monitor thing, and then he would say, "See here, I think you should try and push that bit there," or this facial movement here. I mean, really intensely precise and detailed things that he would ask you to do. And so each time we did it, it was exciting because you were, Stanley was asking you, and he wanted you to go further and further and further with it. And like there were certain times I was like, "Stanley, really? I think we're pushing the boundaries." And he goes, "No, go on." And so it was amazing actually and actually at the time I had a little spell off, and I had one of those times where I was like, I'm a bit bored of acting, I'm a bit bored of films, I'm not sure, I just was a bit worn out and just kind of jaded and not very happy, and also I was hanging out because I thought it'd be good to have some time off, but also Stanley they kept putting me off and off and off, and it took like 8 months from when they told me I was going to do the film to when I actually shot it. And so eventually I did it, and then in that time I just kind of thought, ugh, not because of Stanley, just because of other stuff. And when I came to do the film, I shot on it for a week. It made me it reinvigorated my interest in acting, actually, because this tiny scene that would have been shot in half a morning on a normal schedule took a week and was incredibly detailed, and I felt like, it reminded me that there's no small parts, there's only small actors.
Sounds right to me. And also, you have worked twice with Julie Taymor, who I consider to be Titus and Tempest. I mean, she's such a visionary director, and I know that she approaches the film frame much differently, I think, from Kubrick, from Travis Fiennes, from Doug McGrath, and the various people that you've worked with. We showed 2 clips, actually, from your work with her. Could you talk about what it's like with her in terms of especially these adaptations from Shakespeare? Is that something that you feel even closer to, given your own theatrical background?
Well, there's it's a kind of a double-edged thing. In one way, I feel quite comfortable because I like Shakespeare, and I don't feel scared by him. Or, I think a lot of American actors, especially, have a real inferiority complex about doing Shakespeare, which I really don't understand, and I wish they'd stop. And really, and so when I'm working with Julie in those situations, they're usually pretty crazy. At least I feel with the material, I understand it and I'm comfortable with it and I know I can do it. It's all the other stuff that's going on around about it that is, at least you have a good basis. And then you're in this kind of magical workshop, kind of. And actually it was interesting doing the 2 films 10 years apart. Like Titus was shot in Italy, which I think was partly a contributing factor to how insane an experience it was. Because I don't know if you've ever made a film in Italy, but people shout all the time. It's just like shouting. And we made it at Cinecittà in Rome, and when you come to Cinecittà, you go along like this, and you make a left, and you've got to cross like 2 dual. Do you call them dual carriageways in America? Like two motorways, like 2 lanes of motorways to get into the gates of Cinecittà, and there's no traffic lights. And you think by now they would have put some up, but they haven't. So it's like you're terrified by the time you arrive at work, and then you open the door. And people were just, "Hey, Alan, coffee for Alan, subito," like that the entire time. It was just crazy. So, and I think when we made Titus, none of us quite realized what a huge thing it was. I said that, we all thought we were going to Rome to make this little independent Shakespeare film, and we ended up being in Ben-Hur. When we went to Hawaii to make The Tempest, that was really different. And Julie was, had made a few more films, and she was more comfortable with film, and it was much more calm an experience. And I think it's, and then also I think, in a way, The Tempest is much more about magic and about conjuring. And so I think it was more up her, it was more up her street. She was calmer with that. I think she is like a conjurer.
Absolutely.
I made this. She actually got honoured at something a couple of weeks ago, and they asked me to do a tribute thing, and I couldn't think what to do. So the night of when Hurricane Sandy hit, I went out and I took a video of myself, and I said that I was doing an art project that all of New York had taken part in to reenact the Tempest. And so there's all these trees blowing around my head and plastic chairs flying behind me.
I hope she appreciated it.
She did, yeah, she did. She liked it, yeah.
In a way, I see these two films with Julie Taymor as kind of mediating turf between your pure film work, let's say, and theater. I didn't get to talk much about this in my introduction, but you graduated from the Royal Scottish Academy of Music and Drama. You've performed with the Royal Shakespeare Company, the Royal National Theatre, and in fact, if I understand correctly, just before doing cabaret in London at the Donmar Warehouse around '94, this was before it came to the United States, you did Hamlet.
I did.
They were back to back, and you were quite acclaimed for both of them. It's partly because I know you've been doing a lot of good theater work in New York for the Classic Stage Company, Threepenny Opera. How important is theater for you? I mean, do you feel you have to keep going back to the stage despite the fact that you work quite a bit in film?
I do. I mean, I really think I think it's different. If you've done theatre, then I think you have a different. It's kind of like crack. You're worried you always might go back, or black, and I think if you haven't, I think a lot of film actors just like going to the theatre, but they don't have any desire to do it, and I think that's good. But if you've done it, and if you trained in it and things, there's a connection you get with an audience that you just don't get on a film set. It's lovely when people, obviously, even with a film, you don't always get to do this, sit in a room with people who have just experienced your movie and feel their warmth or whatever. But in the theatre, that connection, immediate connection, is what it's all about for me, I think, being an artist in any kind, and it's the most urgent and immediate type of connection. So I love it, and I just think it's a different thing, and sometimes I love to go away and be in a different location and immerse myself in a movie, but I love the routine and the kind of live, visceral thing of being on stage. And also, recently I've been singing a bit, doing my sort of concert thing, cabaret thing, for the last couple of years, so it's been quite good that although I haven't really done many plays. I just did Macbeth, but before that, I haven't done many plays for a couple of years. But I was in my summer holidays, from The Good Wife. So, but during the term time, if you will, of The Good Wife, I go and I do little shows, little gigs around the country, and with my little band, and I tell stories and I sing songs. And for me, that connection, that sort of live interaction with people, kind of sates me. And so I don't have to go and do, a play for 6 months. So that's quite good.
And you just mentioned the Scottish play. I read that you're going to be performing that, doing every single role. And
I did it. I already did that. I did that last. I did it for the National Theatre of Scotland in Glasgow, and then we did it at the Lincoln Centre Festival
so it
here
was
this
done.
past
Okay.
summer. Yeah.
I guess some people were
Thank you.
lucky enough to see it. I admitted backstage, it's sort of terrible that I rarely go to the theater because I'm watching movies every night. So I was hoping that the Scottish play, I could look forward to it this summer, but obviously I'm a year behind.
We're just talking about maybe doing a short season on Broadway in April after
Please,
I finish. Yeah.
Even I'll
But
make my effort to go.
Yes, I do play all the parts.
All the parts. Is
Yes.
this something that you created, or is there another director?
Oh, there's two directors. There's two directors, and there's me, and there's two other actors actually, who are. It's sort of like there's a. Oh, it's really. I don't quite know how it came about. It wasn't my idea, and it just sort of suddenly happened. And it's about. I play a man who comes into a sort of a Victorian hospital situation, and obviously something terrible has happened to me. I've got big bloody marks on me, and they are undressing me and taking little things from under my fingernails. And then and it's obviously something horrible has happened. You don't know what, and they're observing me. And for the first time I speak is when they leave the room and they press the beep, 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 beep security thing, and they're going out the door, and I turn and go, "When shall we three meet again?" And that's the start. That's the thing. So my character, that man who comes into the room for whatever reason, and reasons become clearer later, is performing Shakespeare as is performing Macbeth as some sort of purging of his soul. And I think and at some point later, there's a point where you realize that there's his own personal story in real life merges with the story of Shakespeare. It's intense. It's super intense. I mean, it's harrowing for everybody, including me and you. But it's, I like it. It was an amazing thing to do.
Now, a moment ago, in the context of juggling your work, you mentioned The Good Wife, and I do feel obligated to ask, how does a Scottish actor like you get cast as this cutthroat Jewish Eli Gold person? How did that happen?
I don't know. It's kind of weird. When I first got offered it, I was like, what? Nah, I don't think so. And, I'm glad I heeded the advice of my team, but I don't know. They just asked me, but I don't know. I mean, I've been, because the movie's about to come out, I'm doing quite a lot of interviews and things, and sort of these, where they talk about lots of your work over the years. And the other day, there was this movie I made called Romeo and Michelle's High School Reunion, which is the first movie I ever. Oh, thanks. The first movie I ever made in America, right? And it was also the first time I'd ever played an American. I was like, why did they cast me in that film? I mean, I know I'm okay in it and everything, but when you look at it objectively, it doesn't really make sense. But, life doesn't make sense. It just sort of happens to you. But you know what's funny? I live in the East Village, and there's a little Ukrainian strip on 2nd Avenue, and there's really funny little ladies, I see walking their dogs, and I was walking my dogs, and this lady, I was waiting at the cross stop, and she went, "Hey, it's you, the Jewish guy off TV." and I was like, "Yeah, that's me, yeah." And then I said, "I'm not really Jewish, though." And she went, "I heard that." Really sorry for me.
Okay. Now, we're going to do something a little strange. We found out this evening that on his way to Key West early tomorrow morning, the director of the film that you just saw, Travis Fiennes, stopped by backstage. And the awareness that probably there are some things that you want to know about this film, much as I do, that can be answered better by both the director and the actor than just even the great Alan Cumming, led me to suggest that we should bring this wonderful filmmaker out at least for 10 or 15 minutes, and I'm going to move over to the podium. Travis Fiennes.
Yeah?
And you get my big pillows. Being tiny, pillow. I need a little extra whatever.
I moved your pillow.
It's quite all right. So I'm going to ask one or two questions, and forgive me, because now, of course, I can't even see Alan Cumming, but at least you can, and that's what's more important. Could you maybe both tell us something about the supposed real story background behind this film? How much was your invention, and how much was based in reality?
Well, the original writer of the screenplay, George Arthur Bloom, he wrote the script back in 1978 through 80. George lived over in Brooklyn on Atlantic Avenue and knew this guy, Rudy. And Rudy was this sort of larger-than-life character that was there in the neighborhood, and Rudy was looking after this kid. And George was so sort of inspired by the connection between, this guy, these sort of these two characters who seemingly would have nothing to do with one another, and yet there was this great connection between the two of them. George was so inspired by their story that he wrote the story. Where he sort of veered off into, the world of fiction is this notion of adoption, and he sort of said, what would happen if Rudy really tried to take this child in? Because, in Rudy's situation, unfortunately, in Rudy's situation in the late 70s, that just wasn't in the cards for them. It was, more of sort of a mentorship and a friendship and a love between these two.
Right. Well, actually, let me ask this question now to both of you. The film depicts a judicial system that is prejudiced and deeply flawed, and therefore it leads to an ending that is painful rather than happy. To what extent do you think that things have changed? In other words, obviously they've gotten a bit better, but what is your sense, both of you, in terms of the present?
Well, try being gay and adopting through the state system nowadays. Good luck, really. I mean, a lot of good things have happened, but not in that respect, really. And especially if you're gay men. There's still such a taboo about gay men and children, and that's why so many gay couples, adopt from other countries or get surrogates. And it's still, in some states in this country, it's actually illegal. In other states, it's just very woolly and very complicated and very litigiously difficult or ambiguous. So in a way, that's another thing that attracted me to the movie in the first place was when I found out more about how little had changed in nearly 30 years. Some things have changed, and some places are good. And like, for example, the two of the investors in this movie this is a really inspiring story. Two of the investors are a gay couple, had fostered 30 kids with learning difficulties over the years, and then wanted to adopt one of them. And the state of Florida, they lived in Florida, and the state of Florida refused to allow them to do so. And another of the investors in the film is a lawyer from the ACLU who helped them in this fight. And in 2010, they fought the state of Florida and they won. And actually, the law was changed. So that's really inspiring that these people have come onto the film, because they feel the story is so important to be told. But the horrible thing about that is that the state of Florida used our taxpayers' money to use $500,000 in legal fees against this couple. So that's what we're fighting against. It's not, in some places it's okay, but we're still fighting against. And in a way, I think that's why people engage with the film. We all know that this type of prejudice and this type of bigotry still goes on in our society. And of course, as members of society, we are complicit in that. So it's a more general thing about just kindness and love, I think we've got to alter. And it's not, I think it comes from that first and then legislation later. Great.
Good.
It doesn't mean that these things still don't happen.
No.
But at least in New York City at this moment in time, things are a little bit different.
But I wonder if they adopted them through the state system. I wonder if they came through, you know what I mean? They didn't. Because, that's the problem. There's all these kids languishing in foster homes and orphanages that could be.
And again, we're not just talking about, it's not just a United States issue.
No.
Elton John, who we all know, a year and a half ago went to the Ukraine, met a child, fell in love with he and his partner fell in love with the child. This boy was HIV positive, and Ukraine said, "You're too gay and you're too old to adopt this child," and so this child's going back into an orphanage. And so it's not just a. Again, it's not just an issue here in New York City. It's not an issue in Florida. We're talking about a human rights issue. People should have the right to freely give and receive love, no matter what their orientation, no matter what their religion, no matter what their color. People should have the right to give and receive love.
And I would just like to add that so often I see wonderful nonfiction films, documentaries that are made about human rights issues, including gender discrimination and the need to change things. But very often, it's a fiction film that touches the emotions of a larger audience that ultimately change awareness and get perhaps more done than, unfortunately, the nonfiction films that we don't get to see as often. And for Alan Cumming, you're also an activist for human rights issues, especially, I think, the International Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission. Do you feel, though, that progress has significantly been made since '79?
Oh gosh, yes. My goodness, I absolutely do. I am married to my husband, and that's a big deal. That wouldn't have happened in 1979.
No.
And there's many great leaps, but you know what? There's still not enough. I am not treated or perceived as an equal member of society in this state or in this country. I am a second-class citizen. I just don't get the same rights and privileges, even though I think that's a terrible word when you're dealing with human rights. So there's lots to. I mean, I don't mean to sound, grumpy. I think there's great things that are happening, and it's obviously I'm very happy to. But I don't see that. I don't like the notion that I should be happy just to be given my rights,
Right.
and that's the difference.
Okay. We will be taking questions in a few moments, but I did want to ask a question of Travis Fine because clearly we know less about his background and his crafting than we've been able to see with Alan Cumming. You started out as an actor, and if I understand correctly, you've been in films like Girl Interrupted, directed by our former Real Pieces guest James Mangold. You were in The Thin Red Line, Terrence Malick's film. At what point did you decide to become a director? And I gather there's also a moment at which you decided to become an airline pilot and sort of went between the two. I would just love to know a little more and to share it with this audience.
I started writing pretty early on in my acting career. I think for a lot of actors, and I know Alan, at a certain point you say, well, I'm sitting around a set and I'm in a trailer and you have to sort of do something with yourself. And I was always a storyteller, so I had the good fortune of selling some screenplays early in my career. And then September 11th had a very profound effect on me. I had just done a film that I was, I guess ashamed is the only word to say. I mean, it's interesting. I was going to the premiere and I'm reading that millions of people will die in sub-Saharan Africa of starvation, and I go to this premiere of this movie where they spent $30 million, and I went, I don't understand. How do if you take the budget of this film, you save these people? And it's such an awful movie, and it's made purely for, it's garbage. It really was garbage. I don't know how else to say it. And nobody did it except for money, and it was one of those moments where I said, I can't do this. And so my wife said, well, what will you do? And I said, I don't know. And thankfully, right around that same time, my acting teacher, Jeffrey Tambor, who is, just a titan of an actor, he challenged me and he said, what scares you? And he said, you have to do something every day that scares you. What scares you? And I said, I'm scared of flying. And he said, go flying. And in going flying, I became determined to overcome my fear. And in overcoming my fear, I fell in love. And in falling in love, interestingly enough, September 11th happened. And for a moment, I said, somehow getting people safely to and from their destination seemed so much more noble and important than saying bad lines in a bad movie or on a bad TV show, I couldn't. And so I left. And I spent the better part of about 9 years very blissfully flying planes, and folks from
Commercial airplanes working?
Yeah, yep, and folks from the flight deck, this is... Reached our cruising altitude of 36,000 feet. We're expecting a smooth ride today. We're going to go ahead and get that fasten seatbelt sign off. We do ask that when you stay in your seats, you keep your seatbelts fastened for your safety. Mary's there in the back. She's going to take great care of you. That was... So, yeah, but I got to tell you, there were times when I would look around and I would go I would look out the window. I'm at 36,000 feet. And I'm on autopilot, and I look up and I go, the fuck am I doing flying a plane? What am I? These people have no clue. I'm an actor. I have no clue what I'm doing up here. But I knew what I was doing. I was a good pilot. I knew, and I loved it. I really loved being away. And interestingly enough, on a flight here into the New York City area, because I was based in St. Louis, and we were flying into JFK, and I was asking, or into Newark, and I was asking my captain, I said, what was 9/11 like, in the air? Because I was on the ground, and he was describing being on the flight deck on 9/11. and getting the call and being told if you don't follow directive, you'll be shot down. I mean, really sort of dramatic stuff. And I said, wow, that's it's a very interesting perspective of 9/11. And I asked him a question that night. I said, what happened to the UMs, which are unaccompanied minors? I said, there had to have been kids flying that day. And from that, the inspiration for a script started. And thankfully, I wrote that, and Melissa Leo, who had been nominated for an Oscar, said, I'm going to star in this thing. And I eventually told the chief pilot, I said, I'm going to quit flying. I'm going to go make some more movies. And, here I am.
And that was The Space Between,
Yeah.
right? Which was shown on
The USA Network.
USA Network on the 10th anniversary of 9/11.
Right.
Wow. Alan, when you're on the set with Travis Fiennes, do you get the sense that he's directing as if he were piloting a plane? I mean, is there a sense in which these things are in any way analogous?
Well, he comes and dabs you with a hot towel between takes.
It's the nuts.
Yes.
Your hot nuts, Mr. Cumming.
Again, yes. No, there wasn't really, he says, he says, I can totally see it. I can totally see Travis flying a plane, but I would be horrified if I went on one and it wouldn't go. But no, we can multitask.
Right. Well, you've done it, of course. I mean, we showed a clip from the anniversary party, which you co-created and acted with Jennifer Jason Leigh. And by the way, if I remember correctly, you were one of the first people, this was 2001, to shoot digitally. I mean, it had not yet been embraced by the film industry, independent or mainstream. And you were able to shoot really fast, 19 days or something.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, as long as we're onto this directing subject for a moment, you and then back to Travis, did you become a director partly because you were frustrated with everything that was being given and you wanted to try something else, or was it that you had that vision of creating something from the beginning to the end?
I think it's an interesting thing that people think actors who become directors are frustrated in some way. Like, God, they're so terrible, I'm going to do it myself. It's not like that. It's more like, I feel like I'm an artist, a storytelling artist, and I tell the stories in different forms. But it's always just telling a story. And so what's great about being a director is that you get to tell the whole story. You get to and you get to finish the story. And it's not like every film a lot of the time I have no desire to direct something, but sometimes, and especially something that I've written, you're so close to, then it kind of makes sense sometimes. And I've always sort of directed a wee bit, little short films here and there and over the years and little projects. But it wasn't through any frustration. It was just really, Jennifer and I wanted to work together more closely than we had in the theatre, and we just sort of made up the story, and it all kind of mushroomed very quickly. And I think also it was an exciting time when digital video was just really starting to be used in mainstream film. We were like the second film, and the most sort of mainstream film to use it, and so it suddenly felt that it was anyone can make a film, and you could just get your friends together, and and that was our sort of spit. It was a bit like Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney, those movies, like let's put the show right here.
And I gather you got your friends, to be in the film. I hope you remember, it was a wonderful movie with Kevin Kline and his wife Phoebe Cates and Gwyneth Paltrow and Jennifer Beals and Jane Addams. And, I got the sense that you kind of wrote the script for your buddies and then improvised.
Absolutely. What I think is another interesting thing, a sort of strand of that, is that Jennifer and I both wrote very honestly about ourselves, sometimes to the point of, TMI. And we also did that about these people, these friends of ours who were in the movie. We wrote for their cadences. We wrote about some of their traits in a very bare way. And we, Kevin and Phoebe. Kevin played an actor who'd just won an Oscar. Phoebe was his wife, who used to be an actress who'd stopped acting to bring up their kids. Their kids were played by their kids. Everyone kind of went for it. And it was exciting because it was sort of like nothing we'd ever done before. But I really do like that thing. I think more and more I'm interested in the idea of letting yourself, your true self, come through, or a part of yourself come through in your work. And it's not just, because I think audiences look at you after a certain level, they don't just look at you as a performer, they know something about you, the person, that adds to why they're interested in you. So I think it's quite interesting to play with that.
And Travis, you wrote this draft of the screenplay, the final version. Did you already have Alan Cumming in mind, or did you write Rudy, without yet knowing who would embody him?
No, the character of Rudy was written before Alan came on board, and it was funny getting phone calls from people saying, "Oh, I know who should play this role." And you sort of got all these different names, and thankfully, when I called Alan's agent, I was talking to him, and he said, "The character you're describing is Alan. I mean, that's Alan." And I said, it was one of those of course it's Alan moments,
And he happens to be a client.
And what was so great is, so often you hear stories of, and it's far too common. You hear stories of actors whose teams stand in the way of them getting involved in projects, particularly smaller projects. And thankfully, Alan not only has a great agent, both here in LA or here in New York and Los Angeles, but his manager, Danielle, she got an email from the casting directors, and thankfully, Melissa Leo, who was with his management company, she in her wonderful Danielle, colorful language, wrote an email back and said, "Travis effing fine. I love that effing writer. His script is so effing good. I'd love to read it." I mean, it was like this whole and it was great because she said, "Yeah, let me get it. Let me read it," and she passed it on. And the great news is, when Alan did come on board, he brought not only such an authenticity as an actor, but he brought a perspective, that I was willing and open to saying, let's talk about who this guy is. And he brought so many colors to the character that I think enhanced the character, made it better, and made the overall film better. So, and I say that unabashedly with him sitting here next to me, how much he brought to the film, seriously.
I think we felt that, yeah. I have a lot more questions, but we have about 10 minutes left, and I know that some of you have questions too. If you raise your hand, I will repeat it as best I can. If no one has one right away, and if you're in the balcony, please yell. And I know this is always the moment that some of you feel, if you've got the car or the babysitter waiting, just go quietly and quickly. There is one question down here on the right. You were blessed with this story and with this cast. Questioning what people say about children is what I want to raise. Alan Cumming, what kind of a child were you? When did you know that you were going to be an actor?
I think I was a mischievous child, but also sort of, I grew up very fast, actually. I had a very bizarre upbringing, and I had to learn adult things very quickly. So I think I knew I wanted to be an actor quite early on, but it wasn't really formed as an actor. I didn't really know that acting was a job, because I grew up in the middle of a forest in Scotland, and there was no acting jobs there. And I think really acting was the first thing I was any good at. And when I was in school, I did some plays in high school, and it was the first thing I was any good at, and the other people told me I was, good at, so it couldn't be denied. So that's really it. It was sort of, I wanted to be a vet originally, and I wasn't allowed to take biology at school because of a dispute with the biology teacher. And on my, you have to fill in a form about, what subjects you're going to take and what your job is. I put actor or writer. And so now I do both. So it all worked out. And screw that biology teacher. I don't want to have my hand up a cow's bum anyway.
Actually, I wanted to push on to that question, one for both of you, whether there were particular actors that inspired you early on, because you, Travis, started acting when you were 7, I think, if I read correctly. I mean, were there certain models, either from theater or film, that made you feel, aha, that's what I want to be doing?
There weren't for me, because I didn't really see any actors. I didn't really see plays or films, really. I saw television, but there wasn't, there's none.
Okay.
Robert Duvall was always a sort of an icon. Sidney Pollack is a filmmaker. And interestingly, a lot of people run through my mind, but I so remember being 15 and watching Richard Gere in An Officer and a Gentleman, and being so moved by that performance, and I went and shaved my head, and I wanted to be Richard Gere. Who doesn't want to be Richard Gere?
You either want to be Richard Gere or be with Richard Gere.
Yes.
I played a part a few years ago that Richard Gere had played. First of all, Ian McKellen did it. It's this play Bent by Martin Sherman. And
Yeah.
Ian McKellen played it first in the West End, and then Richard Gere played it on Broadway. And then when it was done again in West End 4 or 5 years ago, I did it. Thank you.
All right. By the way, one of the reasons I'm smiling is because all 3 of the people that Travis Fine named are former Real Pieces guests. Robert Duvall 2 years ago, Sidney Pollack way before that, and Richard Gere twice. And now Alan Cumming joins that group, so I'm pretty pleased. But Alan, all right, I'll just ask this one and then the woman on the aisle. In terms of inspiration, though, as a director, I was wondering when I saw the anniversary party, which has everything in 24 hours within one house, kind of reminded me of films I love, like Rules of the Game and The Big Chill, and you use the same DP. Were there certain filmmakers who were inspirations for you?
Yes, there were. When we did that film, definitely. Well, I mean, in a funny way, that film was inspired by the Dogma filmmakers, because Jennifer had just made one of those Dogma films in Africa, and it was the sort of the freedom that not having to worry about sound and not having having only on video, no film, and so therefore you can go much faster, and all those kind of rules, that the sort of precision of film were out of the window. So those films were very inspiring in their intention and tone, if not their content. But definitely, we looked at a lot of films that were a lot of Woody Allen films, actually, because a lot of them take place in the same locations.
That's right.
And the way you can make a house or make an apartment a character as well.
Absolutely. Woman on the aisle?
I was wondering how are you able to maintain your various accents?
How are you able to maintain your
It's a question we're
various
all
accents?
asking all the time. I don't know, it's just one of these things. You just do it, you just practice and hope that you don't screw up. I get things wrong all the time, though. In The Good Wife, I'm always looping things. Not necessarily accents, but I'll mispronounce words that just because I say them in an American accent, but I forget the intonation. Like, today I was reading this Arthur Conan Doyle Sherlock Holmes story for an audiobook. And I kept saying, you say, it was the case of the blue carbuncle. And I was saying carbuncle, because that's how I would say it. But
What's carbuncle?
carbuncle is like a big lumpy thing on you. Like a
It
carbuncle. It's like a big boil.
A boil.
Does anybody else know what a carbuncle? I don't.
Yeah.
I've never heard
It's a
this
carbuncle,
word.
isn't
I don't even know this.
It's like a festering boil.
I did want to say that, interestingly enough, the script, because it was written back in 78, 79, 80, almost got made a number of times. I mean, really, and was with a number of different actors. And at one point, Tommy Lee Jones was talking about making this, and Dom DeLuise. And then at one point, the writer had a couple of meetings with Sylvester Stallone, who expressed serious interest in playing the character of Rudy. So
He's always getting my parts as well, so it's
Yes.
Wow.
about time that I got one of his.
And by the way, just one detail, George Arthur Bloom, when I finally did a little research, I was stunned to learn that this man had been very active in the film and television industries with about 300 writing credits. He worked in a production capacity on all these TV series like Ironside and The Alfred Hitchcock Hour and Wagon Train, I think. Yeah. So, I mean, it's a very different universe that he came from, cinematically speaking, into what this film, I think, ended up becoming.
Is
There's a question
Ironside the one in the wheelchair?
Yeah.
Oh, I loved Ironside.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
got that in Scotland.
Question on the aisle?
Thank you for making this beautiful film, and Professor Insdorf, it's been like since 1999 since I was in your class. So thank you for showing it tonight because I thought it was incredible. I have to say I'm embarrassed. I'm a lawyer, and I'm embarrassed to say that I didn't know that the laws really haven't evolved significantly since then. And I'm wondering, what is the game plan for using this as a tool to effect some change in this country? Because I think that now is the moment.
Do you hear it in the back? What is the game plan to use this film to effect some change, given that the legal problems depicted in this film haven't really been solved?
Well, at the end of the day, there are people who are much more versed and much smarter about the legal issues of equality and adoption than me, that I hope will use this as a, maybe as a conversation piece. My goal as a filmmaker was to tell a story about people who were in love. And the fact that they happened to be two gay men and a child with Down syndrome was almost secondary to the love story that I wanted to tell. So we have partners at the Family Equality Council, which is a great organization that's working very, very hard to ensure that anybody and everybody who wants to adopt in this country can. They were there in the beginning with the script. They've been there. They were there when we were shooting, and they are certainly here now, and my hope is that they'll use this to help affect change and to start a conversation. And obviously, as a filmmaker, my hope is that people watch the movie and not only are moved by the love story, but also leave the theater and continue the conversation about what is right. How do I feel about this? Because certainly my opinion about the issue evolved and changed from the making of this movie. I mean, when I started the film, I certainly supported equality, certainly supported gay rights. But in making the movie, I came to understand certain things that probably pushed me a little bit more towards the activist side, than just sort of the passive supporter. So hopefully that will do that to some of the audiences as well.
Okay. We're almost at the end of our time. I just want to say in conclusion that we pride ourselves here at the 92nd Street Y on showing not only the most popular, 2 weeks ago we did Lincoln, which by the way also hinged on a question of legal process, of somebody taking on a cause and changing the situation for a group that had been disenfranchised. I'm not suggesting that the scale of Any Day Now is relatable to the scale of Lincoln, but it's wonderful when an audience like this can discover a smaller film that isn't yet on everybody's radar. And it is my hope that we can all talk about this film to those we know before it opens December 14th. It may not lead to any direct advocacy. I don't know that the film is made in that spirit, but it is certainly a humanizing portrait. And it is made with tremendous craft and artistry by the director Travis Fine, and especially that wonderful, already lauded, and many awards have come to Alan Cumming so far from every festival where the film has shown. I hope that's only the beginning and that you continue to receive many more nominations and awards. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.